Hello everybody, thank you for joining me today. And what we're going to be doing in this video is actually going over some reasons that I've come up with, or some ideas that I've come up with to pad out the game, the base game. That way when a new season comes out, we can have more things to do within the base game. Of course, these are just suggestions. I would like to know what you guys think. I don't think it can hurt that we suggest some ideas, and these ideas are really primarily for the main game, basically the base game. I'm not talking about Eternal Realm, I'm just talking about Diablo as a whole, things that can be implemented and things that we can do as we're leveling up. That way we're not on the same hamster wheel of going to Nightmare Dungeon, going to Helltide, going to the seasonal event, going back to Nightmare Dungeons, going to Helltide. So we want to be able to go ahead and be able to do more things in between, and maybe some side activities, as you guys will see. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into them and explain everything. For the first idea, it has to do with Nightmare Dungeons. Now, Nightmare Dungeons have been in the game since the very beginning, and they haven't really changed much except for the XP and the XP glyph. But in essence, what I wanted to do was add to the Nightmare Dungeons. That way there's a little bit of variability when you're creating Nightmare Dungeon sigils. So what I want to suggest is that we have a small chance to craft legendary sigils. What would that entail? Well, legendary sigils have a small chance to be crafted, but when you are able to craft one, it's gonna be able to, one, increase chances of butcher and goblin encounters. So that way, you know, if you have a legendary sigil, whether it's a bad dungeon that you consider to be bad or a tedious one, it's not going to be all that bad, because you know you're going to be able to run into some goblins, run into some butchers, and get some extra items, potentially a unique. That's the first idea of the legendary sigils. Additionally, we can have visual overhauls of the dungeon itself. So fix up the dungeon, make it look shiny, spotless, and then we can theme it around previous season things like Season of the Blood for season 3, or any of the other seasons, whatever time this could be implemented. That way you can reuse some assets, but at the same time, just make a Nightmare Dungeon look legendary. That's the whole point. Now, as far as the affixes go, my really only suggestion for this would be, instead of getting one positive affix for you and then the rest all for the enemies, we kind of get one more positive affix for ourselves. That way we have two and then one less for the enemy, giving us an advantage and making this a more desirable dungeon to do. For legendary sigils and for the legendary Nightmare Dungeons, it's going to change a little bit the reward. So right now with our normal Nightmare Dungeons, what we get is items that drop on the floor from the boss, items that are given to us by the Nightmare Dungeon, and glyph XP. Now with a legendary sigil in a legendary Nightmare Dungeon, what we'll be able to do is go ahead and either gamble that reward for something, or sacrifice your XP or your glyph. That way you can get more items, or vice versa, sacrifice your items for more glyph XP. That way you have a little bit more control of what you can do and what you farm for. And finally, the boss at the end of the dungeon should have a larger chance to drop class specific unique, and small chance for Ubers possibly. But again, this is legendary sigils that are going to be very rare to get. So it's not going to be commonplace that you're going to be able to do these. These are just more luck of the draw. When you craft a sigil, did you get a nightmare sigil that's legendary? Awesome. Now you have a chance to get specific uniques and potentially a smaller chance of uber uniques. So that's all I have for the legendary sigils ideas. Another way to improve Nightmare Dungeons is, once you clear the same Nightmare Dungeon 3 times, then the map permanently becomes unfogged and all chests and events are highlighted within the Nightmare Dungeon itself. So that way, if we do a Nightmare Dungeon sigil 3 times, after that, the whole map becomes unclear and we're not constantly having to guess, do I make a left, do I make a right? You just go ahead and highlight everything and make it all visible. That way, we don't have to backtrack and we can kind of figure out what we want to do with the map itself. Another idea is sigil powder can be gambled to make normal Nightmare sigils into legendary. So maybe use 500 sigil powder to gamble. There's a small chance to turn that normal Nightmare sigil into a legendary one. Alright, so now that we're done with the Nightmare Dungeons, the next thing I want to move into is Helltide. How can we improve Helltide? Helltide has become a repetitive grind, and this season in particular I've grown to hate it just because of the living steel grind that we've been forced into. But basically, my first idea is just make all chests and events in the map shown on the map. There's zero reason why we should be using a third-party website like helltides.com, as great as it is, thank you whoever made it. but it just serves as a stressor for me. If I have to go to Helltide, I also have to pull up a third-party website. It just gives me a reason not to go. And really, Forgotten Souls and the Living Steel to kill Doriel for 1 kill is not enough of an incentive when I'm just annoyed by it. Now, another thing that I would like to implement is something called Helltide hubs. So whenever the Helltide arises in multiple areas, as the message you get, there is a portion of that area where it's like a building or a camp. It's a hub. Opens up 10 minutes before the Helltide begins, and it gives players a place to reunite to go there and search for teams. That way, you can maximize the amount of XP that you get. The third way I would look to improve Helltide is the events chest should have a chance to drop extra legendaries, extra gold, and a small chance to spawn an enraged butcher with multiple affixes that drop 75 cinders for all players who manage to help with the kill. The last thing I would like to add to Helltide is Diablo's chest. This is what I call it. It's going to be a big chest. It uses 666 cinders to open, and it would drop legendary affixes at max roll. It will drop between 3 and 5 of legendary affixes, and they're going to be completely random, but this is another way you're going to be able to top out your legendary affixes. And that's really it for the Helltide. Now, one of the things I've been reading online, and I've seen several people suggest, is making Helltide permanent uptime, kind of like the Blood Harvest from Season 2. But I think a better idea would be to have a new event, the opposite of a Helltide. I would call it Cathedral's Flood. Now, the Cathedral's Flood would be, instead of hell oriented and demons, it would be heaven and angel themed. That way we can keep with the lore, and it would use alternative areas of the map that are not consumed by Helltide. Now, the way that it would work is that it would be a cyclical system, 1 hour of Helltide, and then the next hour of Cathedral's Flood with constant uptime of the 2 alternating events. And of course, we gotta add a wandering boss. We can just make that a roided up knight, kicking everyone's you know what. My next idea has to do with treasure goblins. I would suggest, instead of having 1 treasure goblin, we add 3. So 3 total. The first type would be an item treasure goblin. Drops items normally as it is now. Then we have a nightmare treasure goblin, and this goblin drops nightmare sigils, potentially a smaller chance of legendary sigils, and sigil powder. The third type of goblin would be resource treasure goblin. It would drop rare resources like Forgotten Souls. Now, all these treasure goblins should have specific colors and glows, have affixes and buffs instead of just running away. The running away is sometimes just annoying, and most time I'd rather let it just get away if I'm a little bit farther away from the map. Now that's all for the treasure goblins. The next idea that I had something to do with health potions. Now, in every town there are healers with pots of health potions, that way you can refill. However, health potions are so abundant that healers have very little purpose. I was thinking that maybe we can give healers an opportunity to shine. Give them a charge counter on top of their head that you can use every 24 hours. Now, upon use of this charge, what would happen is that your health potions have a random passive effect, an effect that would last for 3 hours. Now, this would be nothing that's too overpowered and mostly would be a convenience. For example, I go to the healer, she gives me the effect, I use my charge up, I go into battle, I use the health potion, and I proc a random passive effect. One of the effects could be drinking a health potion turns you into a gold magnet, picking up all the gold that's dropped by the enemies. That way you don't have to run around and pick up all the gold. And now this will last for 3 hours, and then you could not use another charge, or you would not have another charge to be used for another 24 hours. The next thing with the health potions is a level 100 potion upgrade. Currently, we have potions up to level 90. And then after that, once you get to level 100, nothing happens. You really don't get a reward for getting there. But I was thinking, maybe we can have a level 100 potion upgrade. Once you upgrade it, you have a small chance to proc a vampiric power for 30 minutes on a 3-hour cooldown. What this means is that after season 2, we would still be able to have access to vampiric powers, but only at level 100, and once you upgrade into a level 100 potion. It wouldn't be too overpowered because it's only 30 minutes, and then you have a 3-hour cooldown. Now for my next idea, it's something that I've drawn inspiration from another game that I've been playing for a very long time. The old school RuneScape. Anybody who's played that game will know exactly what I'm talking about when I say player owned homes. It would give each and every player a home to go to. So instead of teleporting to Kiovashad or any other city, you could go to your home, and it wouldn't have all the shops, but what it would have is an altar to gain world buffs, armor stands, weapon stands, and a summoning dungeon. Now from level 1 to 100, players can use different types of materials to create and improve that home. When you visit your home, you can even get a well-rested buff by sleeping in your own bed. As you progress and level up, you will have better rates and longer lasting effects as your house improves. I mentioned materials to create the house. Now, from level 1 through 30, you would be collecting wood and stone. Level 31 to 60, you would be collecting cement, brick, and tile. Level 61 through 80, granite, copper, and silver to upgrade the house. 81 to 100 would be decorative gold, obsidian, gems, and any other seasonal themes. Now, as far as the summoning dungeon goes, the way that this would work is that when you kill any boss in the game, that boss has a small chance to drop its essence or energy, which you can then use to summon that boss 5 times within the summoning dungeon. Now, it wouldn't drop any items every time you kill it, but it would provide XP and it can be fought with your friends. Now, for my last idea, it's going to include the horses. Now, for a horse, we've already had plenty of improvements. They go faster, and now they have much less collisions, so it's much more pleasant to use. However, I think that we can add a little bit more. One way would be by having the horse armor or saddle be able to be socketed with gems. Now, each gem will have a different effect, so you could pick and choose. Ruby would have a chance to ignite and burn enemies when charging. With a diamond, a small crystalline shield around you would appear that protects you from one hit. Sapphire has a chance to freeze enemies when charging. Emerald has a chance to spawn a pool of poison when charging. Topaz has a chance to strike one enemy with a lightning strike when charging. If you put skulls, it would increase your knockdown bar threshold. And for Amethyst, you'd have a chance to make yourself invisible to enemies when charging on your horse. Nothing too intrusive, but it is a way to further improve the horse as it feels a little bit left behind. Now that's going to wrap up all the ideas that I have right now to add to Diablo 4. Hopefully there can be some inspiration to be drawn from anything that I've said today. My objective is to try and make the game feel a little bit better as the content is kind of lacking right now. Other than that, I would like to thank all of you who made it this far in the video. If you like what you heard, please consider giving that subscribe button a hit as it's going to help me to grow this channel. Other than that, thank you for joining me today and you have a great rest of your day.